Today's podcast is going to be different than the normal podcast, guys. Today, we are going to cover the Bombshell report from the eyewitness account of those who have been investigating the spending of USAID funds that have actually ended up in the hands of terrorists. And this comes to no shocker or nor surprise to people like myself that have been covering this for months now. You have people like Sarah Adams that has been interviewed on the Sean Ryan Show podcast, which I highly recommend that you listen to those podcasts. Listen to a gentleman nicknamed Legend because his identity is actually hidden for purposes of the fact that he still lives in Afghanistan. And let's just say the Taliban or the Al-Qaeda have a he's a most wanted individual, right? Because of the information that he is shedding and sharing with his corporation, with being one of the those who gave information to the special forces communities, worked with the United States to help capture the Al-Qaeda operatives. So you have people that have come out on these podcasts. You have people like Scott Mann. Check out Scott Mann podcast as well. He has also alluded and shone some light on this matter. And then you have you also have Joe Patty, who is on my podcast, and she's been on a few other podcasts as of late, who is also shedding light on this, where she had a personal involvement working with the Department of Defense in being part of the USAID projects in different countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, and many other countries that she served in. So you have a long list of people that are coming out and sharing the truth about what has been going on. You have special forces guys I've also seen give eyewitness accounts where they were given cash to hand over to the terrorists, essentially, in order to do the bidding of the United States government, and them scratching their heads and trying to and wondering how exactly is this achieving our goals here in fighting the war against terror if we're actually funding the terrorists. So like I said, for those of us who have been in the know for many years now, actually, not just past few months, but for the past few months, people have been coming forward and starting to confront this. And the only reason why this has happened as of late is because now we have a government that it will actually take action and will do something about this. And so there are many like myself that are very grateful that there's a new administration that is willing to crack down on U.S. spending that is going to terrorists. Let me repeat that. There is U.S. tax dollars that is going directly to the hand of terrorists. And I'll just give you a few examples from this report, from this eyewitness account. The bombshell that really kind of is shattered all of this is during one of the hearings on the spending of the United States government that Elon Musk has been trying to spearhead the cutting of these budgets that are basically spending U.S. money and going down into projects that do not support U.S. Policies, U.S. Worldview, etc. And of course, he's getting a lot of heat for this because there's claims from the Democratic Party, specifically from representatives from the Democratic Party, who are claiming that he's just another billionaire that is trying to profit off of the United States government. Well, I don't see how exactly that profits a billionaire who is literally taking responsibility to shave costs of the U.S. government that is going into the pockets of terrorists. Please do explain this logic to me. But hey, these guys are going to argue that that's the case and that this is unfair and that people are going to get affected, jobs and whatever in different programs that are going to get affected. Well, the thing is, you have to be brutal in slashing these budgets that are going into the hands of the terrorists. You can't play around with this, okay? I'll just give an example of what has come up from this bombshell witness. The main individual behind exposing this is a gentleman named Gregg Roman. He is the director of the Middle East Forum, and he is the one who is basically spearheading, trying to shed light on the spending that is, like I said, getting into the hands of the wrong entities that are literally funding our enemies. And when I say our enemies, I mean the United States government and the United States people who are actually paying for this, because this comes from your taxes, y'all. So some of what has been exposed, for example, and this is just literally the tip of the iceberg of what I'm going to share with you here on this podcast. I'm not going to do too much of a deep dive. What I want you to do is do your own research, go online and see what you can find. And by the way, you're also going to see all kinds of misinformation about how Israel is the main contributor of the United States or USAID, AID. That is like, how to say that is correct but incorrect, right? Because it really depends how you look at the facts and how you decipher them. Because like I'm going to point out to you in a minute, you're going to understand that it's all a matter of perspective, right? It's all a matter of, do you understand what these funds go to versus when it goes to terrorist groups versus when it goes to Israel, who are fighting terrorist groups, when it goes to Israel, who is on the front lines of defending the United States, right? So that's the big difference. So there's a huge difference between funding your own self-preservation versus funding those who are literally bent on killing you and the rest of the United States, the West, Israel, etc., who's on the front lines of this war against terrorism. So some of what has come out here from the investigation that is being done right now, and this is really just it is very disturbing to me personally, and has been disturbing for months. But I'm just glad that finally someone is doing something about it, and there's an administration that's going to take action against this insanity. So, for example, $40 million in cash, y'all. These are flown into Afghanistan every week, okay? $40 million per week go directly to Al-Qaeda, okay? Think about that for a second. $40 million goes to Al-Qaeda controlled Afghanistan. In other words, the blood that was shed by U.S. service members overseas in a 20-plus year war against terrorism basically is cheapened by the cash that is being flown into the hands of the very terrorists that these men and women laid their lives down to fight and stop. Okay? That, to me, is infuriating. And for all the America First people out there, by the way, who have thrown Israel under the bus and said that we don't want another Russia Ukraine war, and where we're spending all of our money to fund another foreign war, well, then you are ignorant. You are ignorant if you're comparing the supporting of the war against terrorism here in the Middle East, which Israel is at the forefront of, and funding a war between Russia and Ukraine. Those are two different animals altogether, two different entities, two different agendas. There's no way you can even bring them together whatsoever. But for those of you who are America First and you think you're so smart and you're high on your, you sit there high on your horse and shooting down nasty claims against Israel and saying that we're milking the United States foreign aid, then you don't even know the first of it. Not even the first of it, if that's what you think. Because that's what I've confronted. That's what I've seen online. That's what I've seen by people I've supported, that I've followed. And I've unfollowed you, by the way. Simply because of that. Yes, absolutely. Because if you call yourself, and these are the people that I've stopped following, by the way. These are people who call themselves Christian, calls themselves conservatives, call themselves America First people. When you fall into that category and you throw Israel under the bus and you don't recognize that Israel is part of that worldview, then you're not part of my worldview. You're not part of my online community that I stand with and support each other with. Okay, there are people like Matthew Tardio from Speak the Truth podcast. There are people like Scott Mann. Okay, there are people like Sarah Adams. There are people like Joe Patty that I mentioned as well here. Again, less known, but trust me, this is a heavyweight in this community of people who understand. You have people like Jack Carr. You have Speak the Truth podcast I already mentioned. Sorry, the Vanguard podcast that I was privileged to be on. And again, the Mic Drop podcast, by the way, does not necessarily represent Mike Ritland's personal views on the Israel Middle East conflict. But let me tell you something. Definitely, he and many of the people that are working for him support the war against terrorism. And they completely can identify with the stories that I told and what I mentioned on his podcast as well. So the list is a very long list of people who have given both a platform for people like myself and have shown sympathy and empathy towards the evil that we have been fighting against. And unfortunately, there have been so many others from that same camp, okay, who are saying complete opposite absurdities when you're missing the forest from the trees. You're missing the forest from the trees. When you look at this new bombshell that is being exposed, and it's new to many, it's not, like I said, to many of us, but this is really what it boils down to, is that the United States, during certain administrations, mainly starting with the Obama administration during his first term, have funneled billions of dollars to terrorist entities globally, all over the world. Let me say that again. Starting with the Obama administration and continued through the Biden administration, the policy of funding and supporting terrorist entities has continued in the billions. In the billions. If that doesn't bother you, then you're not an America First individual. And if the fact that you don't recognize that Israel's on the forefront of fighting this, then you've lost the forest from the trees. What else? World Vision. So give you another example of where the funding is going. World Vision, okay, and the Islamic Relief Agency, right? So in other words, a Christian entity that is receiving the funds and through an NGO process of them being an NGO and then funneling the money to an Islamist group, they, for example, were exposed for giving $125,000 that was connected and linked to the recipients directly to Osama bin Laden's precursor to Al-Aqsa, to Al-Qaeda, to Al-Qaeda. So think about that for a minute. So you have Al-Qaeda receiving funds from a Christian NGO, the World Vision. Again, you can all do your own research. You'll see what I'm talking about. This isn't some kind of conspiracy theory. These are facts. And this is what's so scary about this. If it was conspiracy theory, I wouldn't be talking about it. And anybody who's been following me long enough knows I avoid conspiracy theories like the plague, many of which I have believed in or supported, but because I couldn't prove it, I wouldn't say a word about it. But this is stuff that I know for years I've been waiting for the right opportunity to come out about this, because knowing that the masses were not ready to receive this kind of information. So thank God I'm able to talk about this openly and not get so much heat of you're just making another conspiracy, you're just blah, 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 blah. No, this is an active investigation the United States government is doing to cut the budget going towards terrorist entities, because they're recognizing that they've made a horrible mistake and that billions of dollars have gone unaccounted for that goes into the pockets of terrorists, and are continuing this warfare that we're fighting, by the way, here in Gaza, in Lebanon, and in Syria. All three of those fronts have received U.S. aid. And I will throw in there the fourth front that is not being talked about on this forum that I've seen is also going directly towards the terrorist groups in Judea and Samaria. So that's not been talked about, but that I can prove to you. I can show you firsthand where I've seen U.S. AID going into the pockets of terrorists, also in Judea and Samaria, in winning hearts and minds projects. So where else does this money go to? It goes to United Nations. It goes to all kinds of NGOs, all kinds of NGO front groups, et cetera, et cetera. And when you recognize that during this war that the IDF has exposed that over 2,000 employees of the United Nations in Gaza, that we were able to expose that they were terrorists, all of a sudden the world's like, wait, what? What are you talking about? United Nations? Yes. Over 2,000 employees. And I imagine that, and this was months ago, I imagine the number is much, much higher as of today. But that's what we came out publicly and shared about just a few months ago when we exposed these entities that are basically funding terrorists directly, but they're on the paycheck and on the payroll of the United Nations, as another example. So you have anything from, like I said, from the actual Al Qaeda in Afghanistan, Al Shabaab in Somalia. Okay, you have the Hamzi network in southern Sudan. You have Hamas, as I pointed out. You have the Islamic Jihad. You have Hezbollah. Okay, in Lebanon. You have terror groups in Syria, as the Al Qaeda groups, right? The ones who just took over Syria, by the way. For those who might have forgotten about that, I haven't. All right, those CNN and BBC reporters who sat down with the so-called formerly new leader of Syria, he is the head of Al Qaeda in Syria, plain and simple. All right, and he used to be part of the top 10 most wanted list for the United States, and now he is magically taken off of that list and welcomed into the international community as a world leader. You got to be kidding me. This is how the world has been operating and working in the past, like I said, many years now, with just crazy policies. But most recently, in the past 2 years now, or let's say year and a half now, with the war in Gaza, this is all coming to the front. It is all coming to the front. All this dirty laundry is being exposed. And I pray for the Trump administration and those who have been commissioned to get that dirty laundry out, that they will be very successful and that they will be very thorough and very just in their reporting, that not everybody gets thrown under the bus here and people that had nothing to do with what have you. Because I imagine, it's easy to go on a witch hunt, but you got to be careful and make sure that we really do get the people who have been involved in funding terrorism and those who are not. Any case, so like I said, there's been so much funding going to these terrorist entities, and I'm only highlighting a few of these instances. But I will give you an example that since October 7th, another area, and as I just noted, also Hamas being one of these entities that have been receiving this funds in the World Kitchen entity, for example, or United Nations funding for refugees and humanitarian aid and such and such and such. Okay, Red Cross, you name it. Okay, so bottom line is that since October 7th, Hamas terrorist groups, okay, have received from the United States an estimated $2.1 billion. Let that sink in. $2.1 billion going directly to Hamas, okay, or an estimate of about 90% of which went directly to Hamas in a package, so to speak, of humanitarian assistance, humanitarian aid going towards the Gazans. So the Hamas terrorist group in Gaza that we've been trying to crush, okay, in this war since October 7th. We've been trying to crush them. We've been trying to do, and I say we, I've been serving in the Israeli Defense Forces, in the IDF's reserves, special forces units, together with the combat battalions, taking the fight to the enemy and trying to crush Hamas. Okay, our whole goal has been to try to crush Hamas and to restore the peace in southern Israel and in the rest of Israel that have been targeted from these terrorist groups, and to restore our hostages. Now, just to talk about this for a quick blurb out of this whole deal that I'm talking about mainly here on this podcast, what is the condition of the hostages? Nobody's talking about that. Not that I've seen on any of the news networks. You don't hear anybody talking about the fact that they have been not receiving not one visit from the Red Cross, on the exception of receiving their dead bodies in caskets and or their skeletal Holocaust style whatever's left of these individuals that have been released alive in the most horrific starvation conditions. Just recently, one of the hostages was brave enough to share his personal experience of how they would receive, I think he said something like about roughly around just over 200, let's say 300 grams of nutrient a day of pasta. All right. That was the daily portion these guys were living off of for, think about this for a second, over a year and a half. Over a year and a half. What he shared to me was shocking. Not that I didn't know what was happening, but when you hear this person trying to put us in his shoes, because I haven't been in his shoes, I don't know what it's like to be held captive. I don't know what it's like to live under extreme starvation situations. I have, in my childhood, had a short blurb of hunger, but it's nothing at all in comparison to what these people have experienced. I can't even imagine what they've been through. And so hearing this individual talk about how basically his stomach would cave in on itself from loss of body fat, loss of muscle, etc., and how the only thing that they thought about and the only thing they could care about was when they're going to get their next meal. He said they would beat us and torture us, but the only thing I could think about was food. Like, think about that for a minute. These people are being beaten and tortured, and literally that is nothing in comparison to how much they're starving. And he said at times the terrorists would throw a date at them, okay, a little date, right? He would toss a date at them, and they would like, oh, it was like a pick me up, right? From the level of starvation these guys were at. And you hear stuff like that, and he says, you need to think, this is a very eerie statement that I hope this sinks into you as much as it sunk into me when I heard this man's testimony. He said, you don't understand how mind-blowing it is for me, the hostage was saying, for me to open up a refrigerator and for there to be food there in abundance. Can you imagine? The next time you open up your fridge and you look for, you have the munchies, that feeling where you're so full and stuffed, but you just have the munchies, okay? In other words, you're just eating to eat. You're not eating because you're starving. And you open up the fridge and you don't know what to eat. You know that feeling? Well, this is the complete opposite of that feeling. It's open the fridge and being at shock of the abundance of the opportunity of food to take care of your starvation. That's the kind of condition these people were being held under when the whole international community was up in arms and saying the opposite, that the Gazans were the ones who were starving. The Gazans were the ones who were having the hard conditions and all eyes on Rafah. Remember that? Remember those slogans and those crazy statements? Yeah, all eyes on the hostages that are starving. Should have been the slogan. But no, it's all eyes on those holding the hostages in their homes, as we discovered. And I had seen firsthand while in Gaza. We saw, you don't want to know what we saw, but the conditions in which we saw how they were using their own homes to aid and abet terrorism in girls' bedrooms and in mosques and in hospitals and you name it, it was mind-blowing. It's like nothing in Gaza is off limits to these people. And yet the whole world had sympathy for these people that were committing the crime, not for the people being held hostage. That blows my mind. And you know what is even more disgusting to me is when I see the reports that are proving that money went to help the Hamas terrorists continue their fight against the IDF, against the soldiers that were laying down their lives to restore and bring back hostages home. It is just mind-blowing to me. So now let's talk about Israel aid, right? All of the foreign aid that goes annually all over the world. What is the percentile, do you think, that goes towards Israel? You know, a lot of people, like I said, in America First camp, throwing Israel under the bus and saying that it's not right for Israel to be able to it's not right for America to fund Israel's war against Hamas, right? That's what you guys claimed. People I used to follow, and I unfollowed them just like that. And I'll unfollow you again and again and again if I discover that that's your stance against Israel, if you're that stupid. So here's some facts, okay? It's important that you know that America's annual support for Israel is at $12.5 billion, which represents less than 0.0001% of U.S. federal spending. Let that sink in again. 0.0001% of U.S. federal spending goes towards supporting Israel's war right now, currently as we speak, which, by the way, is more than it has been throughout the years, simply because the IDF and mainly the Air Force has had to replenish the munitions that they have been needing to use to fight off the terrorists. And we're talking about billions that have also gone into air defense systems to help defend Israel from ballistic rocket attacks from Iran, from the Houthis, from Lebanon, you name it. Okay? In other words, because Israel is in the worst. Here's another little fact for y'all, just to let it sink in. Why is so much money going towards Israel? Well, here's why. Because America took the stance of positioning Israel in a position where we're funding the terrorists while we're so-called funding and supporting Israel, right? It's like a double standard of we'll support both of you guys. Instead of support Israel to end this war, and then the U.S. foreign spending that has to go towards this war goes to a bare minimum. In contrast, like, let that sink in, what I'm trying to explain to y'all. Like, do you understand that if America would literally truly support Israel's cause in this war, 100%, the war would have been over by now. Long ago, months ago. But I remember, and this is my personal memory, and you know what? My memory could be a little foggy because I've been in months of war fighting and fighting for my survival and the survival of my men and the survival of my country. So it's very possible that my memory is a little foggy. But I recall that in mid-December, as the momentum of the beginning of the war was going, and we felt like, okay, we're really getting some objectives done here. We're really pressing ahead. That all of a sudden everything came to a screeching halt. And I remember going, what the heck's going on? And then we were talking amongst ourselves because, again, we're deployed. We don't have our cell phones. We don't have all of communication of the outside world and what's going on in the world. But then we hear that what happened was that the United States decided, according to, under Biden's administration, decided to pull the transport of munitions to our Air Force, and that the momentum needed to come to a screeching halt because they wanted a ceasefire. The United States administration wanted a ceasefire while Israel had its boots on the throats of our enemies. Let that sink in. Because that's what I knew from being on the battlefield, that we were getting so close to putting an end to these guys, and then ceasefire, and then another ceasefire, and then again and again and again. And that's how it's been throughout the whole war. The same with Lebanon, with Hezbollah in the north. What does that do? It lets them regroup. It lets them refinance themselves. It lets them get new recruits. And by the way, for those of you who are not aware, let this also sink in. You recall that Nasrallah just had his funeral here last week? And do you recall that you had an American, boots on the ground? I forget his name now off the top of my head because I don't know this guy from Adam from before, but now he's famous because he went over there to support, he called the martyr, Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah in Lebanon, the head of the terror group Hezbollah. Let that sink in. And during his funeral, we're talking about tens of thousands of operatives from all over the Islamic jihadist world got one-way tickets to Lebanon to join the ranks of Hezbollah. So they just replenished their ranks. They just replenished themselves with terrorist groups coming from all over the Middle East, from Turkey, you name it. And I can only imagine that many also who hold citizenships in European nations who went there as refugees, and I know this firsthand when I used to live in Sweden, I knew from the intelligence agencies in Sweden that I had direct contact with and asked them about and raised my concerns about that these nationals who also have Swedish passports now are flying to go fight in the civil war in Syria and in Iraq and all these bloodshed war zones, and are coming back with blood on their hands. And they told me, he said, Dawn, we know that these guys are doing what they're doing, but our government, they told me, okay, because of politics, we're not allowed to touch them, is the way they explained it to me. And we're talking about years ago. So what do you think the situation is today in Europe? And the situation is today in these countries, they're aiding and abetting terrorists as so-called refugees. You think they haven't taken a one-way flight to go join the ranks of Hezbollah and or the ranks of Al-Qaeda in Syria that have now shown themselves to be a worthy cause to fight for? Absolutely. Because remember, they were fighting there years ago, and now finally Al-Qaeda did take over. Well, now they're going to come back. And they'll be like, well, you know what? It didn't look like we were going to win back then. You know, it looked like Assad was holding you guys off and, you know, whatever. And many of them lost hope. But let me tell you, these new gains are helping arm the ranks of these terrorist groups, and they have the funding to fund it. Not just from the United States, in all of these proxy style funding. And you might ask, well, why would the United States do that? Well, here's the deal. The United States isn't directly trying to fund terrorism, okay? But there are certain, in my opinion, there are certain entities, certain individuals within the United States government who have found a way to send foreign aid through education programs, through building programs post these wars, through all kinds of different projects and programs, okay, that look and seem to be on its face, on face value, to be a good cause program. And what they do is they will fund a local entity, right, to either do the build or make the school or teach in the school and what have you. But what happens is, because there isn't any oversight, proper oversight, okay, and according to this, according to the eyewitness account from Gregg Roman, he pointed out that there are trillions of dollars that are unaccounted for because of how the USAID has been handed out through all these different NGOs and different programs. So there's much of which of this U.S. budget, okay, of the people, okay, it comes from your tax dollars, goes directly to the hands of terrorists because of a usurpative way in which the money is being funneled, and it is, in my opinion, there are some heads that need to roll in the United States government who knew full. In my opinion, this was not their mistake. I think there are those who worked for these entities that probably did not know, but I believe there are many who did know, those of the deep state, okay, that they knew exactly what they're doing. They're trying to weaken America by strengthening the terrorists. They're trying to weaken the West. And that is how one of the ways of which they were able to do this. And like I said, you need to pray for the United States government right now. You need to pray for Donald Trump and his administration to be able to crack down on this and put an end to this. And so that whatever administration takes over afterwards, that there's no way that they can go back to this because it's all in the light, right? Because it needs to be complete 100% transparency of where the funding goes from the United States people to these foreign projects. And in my opinion, there needs to be a huge slash and cut. And I'm going to also include funding that goes to Israel, because Israel, with all due respect, doesn't need your funding. Not in the same way as other countries need your funding. What we simply need is your support, and let us export our technology in other ways where we can make up for whatever America doesn't send us, because that's how the game works with the USAID that goes towards Israel. It goes towards our joint projects that actually help strengthen American jobs, American. You know what? I'll give you some examples. All right. So how does USAID to Israel serve American interests? Right. These are some questions that we need to ask. So financially, the USAID investments, okay, that are made go directly into American jobs, giving over 20,000 jobs in the United States directly, and it supports thousands of other jobs. Over 1,000 companies in the U.S. have signed contracts worth billions of dollars through America's commitment to help Israel defend against ascending threats. So there is one clear example, okay, again, for the America First people. Yes, USAID towards Israel literally funds thousands of US jobs worth billions. And when you clump Israel together, like I said, with the war with Ukraine and Russia, then you are just ignorant and you don't understand the realities. The money going into Ukraine, right, does not fund U.S. corporations, to my knowledge, okay? And please, if somebody who's listening to this, you want to correct me on that, knock yourself out. I don't claim to know everything about the Russia-Ukraine war and invested interests and whatever, all right? So I'm not even going to get into that because that's not my expertise, and I'm very honestly telling you that right here, putting my cards on the table, right? But what I do know is that it's not comparing apples and apples, it's apples and oranges, okay? These are two different motives behind the two causes. And I understand people's outrage and frustration with how much money has gone to Ukraine, but quit taking it out on Israel. Plain and simple. Quit taking it out on Israel. Israel, by the way, was roped in to support the United States cause in Ukraine, which put us at odds with Russia. And that is not good at all for Israel, because Israel needs to have as many allies as possible to be able to survive here on the front lines of the Middle East as being the only democracy here. And there are nations who side with our enemy states that try to destroy us. And that's our reality. that you don't have to worry about. I know, because you live in America. Congratulations. You're welcome that all your wars have been put far away from you. But at the same time, if you've been paying attention to anything that myself and others have been saying, your October 7th 2.0 is around the corner. So you better hang on to your relationship with Israel and learn everything you can from us, from our lessons learned from October 7th, to help you stand your ground when that horrible day comes knocking on your door. And that the terrorists do give the green light to an attack that they have been planning for years on U.S. soil. And it's coming. And you guys have only tasted a drop in the bucket of it with what you saw in New Orleans and other attacks that have been carried out all throughout. They're just testing the responses of the first responders and the law enforcement and so on and so forth. I won't get into that. That's a whole other deal. And like I said, I've been talking about it in the U.S., and you're more than welcome to listen to the many hours of podcasting that I've done while traveling in the United States talking about this very issue. So, like I said, I just gave some examples of how this funding is actually helping defend the United States' causes here in the Middle East. It is putting a buffer between the bad guys and you. And this is not anything new, okay? I'll give you an example. Former Secretary of State, U.S. Army General Alexander Haig, and I'm probably butchering his name, by the way, observed 35 years ago, and it still resounds true to be today. Israel is the largest American aircraft carrier in the world that cannot be sunk, does not carry even one American soldier, and is located in a critical region for American national security. Do you understand what I just read there? The quote from this general? His point is real simple, is that basically Israel being positioned where we are helps America strategically position itself in a way where it can guard itself from extreme terrorists who are hell-bent on the destruction of the West and the United States. That's the bottom line of what that means, okay? If you don't understand that, Mr. and Mrs. America First people, then you've missed the forest from the trees. I'm not trying to fight here for or argue here for funding Israel. I don't want your money. I really don't want your money. I've argued for years, and I've agreed with Rand Paul, for example, who was I met while speaking here at one of his events, who said that we need to start bringing down the U.S. aid that goes towards Israel. And then, in other words, we need to renegotiate how essentially we make Israel more independent here in the Middle East and not dependent on the U.S. money that is being sent towards Israel. Like I said, baked into these Israeli-U.S. defense projects and whatever. And I think there's a smart way where we can do that to where Israel truly can say we don't receive United States funding. Israel can do that. Israel has a very strong GDP, okay? One of the strongest in the world. And we can become even stronger when we become more independent. And that's actually my position. But what I'm also saying is, since the politics as of yet have positioned Israel in such a way where we are dependent on the United States making good on your agreement that you made with us, well, then you do have to supply us with the munitions that we need during wartime. And that's just the reality. And that's where we're at right now. All right. And that's just the bottom line. And for people to argue against that, it's convenient for you to do that. But guess what? Cut our legs from under us, you cut the legs from under yourself. And then I don't want you turning towards Israel for help when you find yourself facing the terrorists knocking on your door. Don't come asking us for help, or anyone else for that matter, because you want to be so independent and you didn't need us. That's just stupid thinking, because you don't understand how fighting terrorism globally works. You have to have allies in the Middle East, and you have to have allies, guess what, in Europe. You have to have those allies because there are terror groups globally all over the world. You have to have allies in Asia. You have to have allies in Africa. But because you're so independently thinking about yourself, you forget that the world does not revolve around you. And that there has to be a cooperation globally to where we collectively, who believe in the Judeo-Christian values, are going to fight this extremism together. And so you're either going to have a team mindset or you're going to have a Team America only mindset. And that's fair enough. If that's your position, knock yourself out. But I do believe and am working together with my allies in the US and in Europe and in Africa and in all over the world. That's just me personally with the advocacy work that I do and the different collaborations I've been doing throughout the years. That's how I operate personally. I don't see myself as living on an island to me and myself. If there's anything that Israel can help build in technology, in agriculture, in energy projects and whatever, for example, in Africa, which I've been doing and collaborating with groups for years and helping them get on their feet and become independent and be the ones who run these high-tech industries. They're going to support them in their country and develop them to be independent, not dependent on us. That is the exact thing that we've been working on for years. And again, people don't know this because I don't talk about it too much. But this is the kind of stuff that I've been involved with because that's what I believe. Again, I don't believe in being an island to myself. If there's something that I can contribute as a nation to the world, and Israel has done exactly that globally, how dare you then turn on us and say, we don't need you, we don't need you. Well, good, then get off all the social media platforms, get off your smartphone. Because if you really want to be altruistic, then quit using Israeli technology, right? Yeah, we could go there. But in any case, I digress. I want to keep this short. I want to keep this to the point. And hopefully some of the pointers that I've given you today help give some insight, some light on this ongoing investigation the United States is doing with trying to cut funds. They're ending up in the hands of basically terrorists. And I think it's important that you understand Israel's position here in the Middle East and in the front lines against the war against terror, and that we are trying to help the collective whole, not just ourselves, to rid ourselves from these terrorists, if it's Islamist groups, and or if it's communists, and or if it's Marxists that you've been seeing on the streets in America, and how you see the Red-Green Alliance fighting against Western civilization, fighting against Judeo-Christian values and foundations that every one of these nations have been founded on, and is the base for a civil and right society. That's all I have for you guys today. I want to thank you for listening to this podcast. Please share this, guys. The truth needs to get out. The truth behind a lot of these subjects that we've been talking about. The word needs to get out there. People need to be informed. People need to be strengthened with truth. And thank you guys for your prayers, for your support. If you want to support this channel, by the way, go to the support link. Be a Patreon to help support the ongoing costs of making this channel relevant and at the front lines of the disinformation that is going out there through the mainstream media. And my prayers this weekend, and I pray that you also will join with me, go towards the Bibas family, the husband that has just buried his wife and two sons. And may God strengthen him and his family as he is now entering, and they are collectively as a family entering, and the nation is collectively entering into this weekend and this new month. By the way, we've just entered a new month here on the Jewish calendar. And so for us, this is a very heavy weekend, a heavy week that we've had in general. So I appreciate your prayers, guys, and for the remaining hostages that are crying out that we will release them from their bondage. God bless you and shalom from Israel.